Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and here is my late again card for this week's color throwdown challenge. I will have a link to the challenge and a graphic with the color inspiration on my blog. And I'm using the new Pure Innocence Milk and Cookies stamp set from My Favorite Things. And I inked up the stamp with Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink, and I'm stamping it onto a scrap of neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. And because this is a brand new stamp and I usually just rub my hands against my stamps when they're new, it helps kind of condition them a little bit so that they take ink better. But I didn't do a good enough job the first time, so I inked it up a second time and stamped that, and I got a much better impression with the second one. And then I inked up the little glass of milk there and stamped that as well. And now I've super sped this part up, and I am using my Copic markers to color it in, starting with the skin, using one of my old go-to color combinations, E13, E21, E50, and then I go in and add R20 for the cheeks later because I forgot. But I will have all the Copics I used and labeled on my blog post, which I'll have linked directly below the video. But I'm doing the same old that I always used to do. I start with the skin and then the hair, and then I go on to the clothing and everything else. And really, really simple. Other than the hair, I've been doing what I've been doing a lot lately, which is just starting with the darkest color and working my way to the lightest. I find it's just the easiest for me with Copics. You can do whatever works for you. But for me, I prefer going darkest to lightest. That's what I've been doing for the last year or two, and I really like it. Plus, with using a lighter weight cardstock like this, if you're new, I recommend the 110-pound. It's thicker cardstock. It gives you a little more time for the markers to kind of absorb into the cardstock, so you're not getting it to seep out and everything like that. But I chose 80-pound this time because I plan on fussy cutting this out, and thinner cardstock is just easier to cut out and looks a little better in my opinion, because I'm going to do a little bit of layering. So I colored in my whole little image here and left the chair because I don't want that. And then I'm using my detail cutting scissors, which are my cutter bees, and cutting right against the line to fussy cut out this entire image, which didn't take too long. These are fairly simple images to cut out. There are coordinating dies, but they cut the border around it, which is fine. But for what I want to do, I don't want the border. So I did the fussy cutting, and then I grabbed my Memento Tuxedo Black marker, and using just the edge of the marker, I'm just painting the edges of the cardstock here, and you can see it just covers up that little white border you can kind of see from the thickness of the cardstock, and this is where thinner cardstock works a little better. And it just makes everything look like it's been perfectly trimmed out, even though it hasn't. And then I grabbed some pattern paper from the Echo Park Follows in the Air 6x6 pack, and I'm inking up the stamp again and stamping it onto this striped pattern paper. And then I'm going to take my N1 and N4 Copic markers and add in some shading to give this a bit of depth, because when you do paper piecing, I've done a lot of it in more of my older videos. I don't do it as much lately, but a lot of my older videos, adding the shading and whatnot just gives the paper a little bit more depth, and otherwise it just looks like it's floating there. It doesn't look like it belongs, if that makes sense. So I'm adding all the shadows and whatnot with that N4 and then blended out with my N1, and then I just took my my colorless blender, just to blend it a little bit more. And then I'm going to add some, I think E29 is what I use just for the feet of the chair. And then same thing, I'm going to cut this chair out with my detail cutting scissors. This was also why I chose to do paper piecing with this, because it's a really simple image to trim out, so I wasn't sitting forever doing a ton of fussy cutting. So quickly trimmed out the chair, and I cut the bottom of her feet off on the chair image because you're not going to see that anyway. And then I did the same thing. I quickly went around those edges with my Memento Tuxedo Black marker, because then that just makes everything look seamless. And now you can see how it all just comes together, and it just makes the little character, she just pops over that. So I took my Tombow Mono Multi and put a little bit of adhesive on there, and then adhered her over that pattern paper. And the Mono Multi just gives me a few seconds to kind of wiggle this around and get it into place before the glue sets, and then once it's set, we're done. So I've got those adhered, and then I'm going to go on to actually creating the card. So I have some more white cardstock that I die cut with the largest die from the Blueprints 1 Die-namics. And then I have the Moroccan tile stencil, Moroccan lattice stencil it's called. So I laid that over top, and then I just taped it down directly to my craft mat here. I wasn't worried. I didn't want the stencil to be perfect, like lined up perfectly. I did it a little bit on an angle, and I just put the tape on just to hold it into place. And then I grabbed some Distress ink in old paper. And I'm just inking it up, and I keep lifting up the stencil because it's hard to see when the stencil's on, like how much ink has been applied to the paper. And I just wanted to make sure I had it kind of fading out a bit, but I wanted to make sure you could still see it past the edges of this little main image. So once I was done with that, I removed the stencil, and then I die cut some chocolate brown cardstock with the new oval scalloped edge frames Die-namics, and I used the largest one for that. And then I also pulled out the stitched flowers Die-namics, and the only reason I pulled those out is they were in the pile, because it's like, you know, the pile of new release goodies, and they were sitting right there under my nose, and I was like, ooh, I could make some embellishments with these. So I die cut some chili powder cardstock with those, and then the leaves were die cut with just some solid pattern paper from that same pack, so then they matched the stripes on this chair. So I adhered the die cut frame flat to the card front here with my monomulti, and then I popped the little main image up with some foam tape, and then the sentiment I just stamped onto a scrap of white cardstock and trimmed it out with my paper trimmer, and then decided to sponge the edges with that same old paper ink just to kind of tie everything in together. And then I popped a piece of foam tape onto that as well, just to give it that little extra bit of dimension. And I did the same thing with the little glass of milk, just took a tiny piece of foam tape and popped that onto the arm of the chair. And even as I was doing this, you can totally tell I'm a mom. All I could think of was like, oh, her elbow is so gonna knock that over. But I did it anyway. So I did that, and then the flowers I popped up with some foam tape, and then the leaves I curled them a little bit, just bent them with my fingers, and then applied adhesive just to one edge, and then tucked them underneath the flowers here, so they're kind of peeking out and they've got just a little bit of dimension. So it gives it a little bit more interest. And then I went through my stash and I found some enamel dots from like forever ago. These aren't on the market anymore, but I just found some enamel dots that were kind of the similar beigey sort of color to that old paper distress ink. So I popped those on, and those totally finished the flowers. And then I had coated the entire card front piece there with some foam tape, and then popped that onto my card base, which is the neenah 110 pound cardstock. And I cut that to 4 1/4 by 11 and scored it at 5 1/2. So it's a top folding A2 size card. And then on the inside of the card, I cleaned off the main image and then inked it up with that same old paper distress ink, stamped that into the center of the inside of the card, and then stamped the coordinating sentiment there, and that finished off my card. So really cute, super fun. Like I said, I will have a link below the video to my blog post, which will also have a link to the color challenge, the pictures, the Copic markers used, all the supplies, all that info will be in the description box below the video. And then here at the end, I've got links to 2 previous videos I've done with cute little pure innocence images. So if you've missed those, you can click on those to check them out. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.